My wife's daughter humiliated me in front of the whole family. When I complained, my wife cut me off. You aren't her father. Don't demand respect. I just smiled. The next day, I cut her off. Her university, apartment, car, phone, and card all disappeared. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching us from. The humiliation happened on a Sunday in front of everyone, and I didn't say a thing. Iris looked at me with a smile that wasn't a smile, it was contempt. She pointed at me in front of her uncles, her cousins, the whole family gathered at that table, and said something that made the air in the room go still. Something no one expected, something I didn't expect either. Although, if I'm honest, a part of me had seen it coming for a long time. When I complained, when I tried to say something, my wife interrupted me. Without hesitating, without a second thought, she looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not her father. Don't demand respect from her." Total silence. No one spoke. No one defended me. I just sat there with those words hanging in the air while everyone pretended to look at their plates. I just smiled. I didn't say anything else that night, but the next day, I canceled the university, I canceled the apartment, I returned the car, I cut off the cell phone, and I blocked the card. All at once in silence. And if you think that was an overreaction, wait until you hear everything that happened before, because this story doesn't start on that Sunday. It starts much earlier. And when you get to the end, you'll understand why I did what I did. Because what I discovered in the following days changed everything. Not just what I thought of Iris, not just what I thought of Elda, but what I thought of myself, of the years I'd invested, of the decisions I'd made, believing I was doing the right thing. My name is Moises. I'm 44 years old, and this is what no one saw from the outside. When I met Elda, I'd already been through the worst. A marriage that slowly fell apart, like something rotting without you realizing it. Years of trying to save something that was beyond saving. A separation that cost me more than anyone can imagine. Not just in money, although in money too, but in energy, in time, in the version of myself I thought I was. I came out of it with little, a small apartment, some debts I paid off slowly, and a strange feeling of starting from scratch at 37 years old. It's not easy. Nobody tells you that rebuilding your life at that age feels like learning to walk again, but with a tired body and a head full of scars. You wake up one day and everything you thought you'd have, the stability, the family, the home you imagined, is gone, and you have to decide whether you stay on the floor or you get up. I got up. It wasn't overnight. It was slow, with stumbles, with long nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was something wrong with me. If I was the problem, if I was always going to end up alone, but I got up, I worked harder than I had in a long time. I reorganized my finances. I built something new. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And when I started to find a rhythm, when I started to feel that life was making sense again, that's when Elda appeared. I met her at a work meeting. She was a friend of a partner of mine. It wasn't a movie like Love at First Sight. It was something slower, more real. Long conversations, messages that started at 10 at night and ended at 2 in the morning. That feeling that someone understands you, that someone sees you after so long feeling invisible, after so long being the man who tries, but is never enough. With Elda, everything seemed different. It seemed calmer, more mature. As if we'd both learned something from our wounds and were ready to build something different. She was intelligent, confident, she knew what she wanted, or at least it seemed so. And she was a mother. Iris was 16 when I met them both, a quiet teenager who looked at me with distrust, which was completely normal. I didn't expect her to love me right away. I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to be present, be respectful, earn that space little by little without pushing, without trying to take a place that wasn't mine. And that's what I did. I approached slowly. I took her out to eat when Elda worked late. I asked her about her classes, about her friends, about what she liked. I didn't try to be her father. I just tried to be someone trustworthy, someone who was there. Elda and I got married 2 years later. It was a small, intimate ceremony. And from that moment on, I took on the household, not because they asked me to, but because it was what I felt I should do because I loved Elda, and she came with Iris. And for me, that was a complete package, not a burden, a responsibility I chose. Iris was 18 when I started paying for her university for $1,000 per semester. I didn't complain. It was the right thing to do. I thought it was what a responsible man does when he decides to be part of the family. Then came the other expenses. The apartment when Iris wanted to live alone near campus. $800 a month. The car because she needed to get around, because transportation was complicated, because this, because that, the credit card for daily expenses, the cell phone, the plan, everything. In total, between university, apartment, car, card, and various expenses, I was putting more than $3,000 a month into the life of a girl who had never once said thank you to me. $3,000 every month for years. And I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because it's a fact, because in 6 years, Iris never called me to ask how I was. She never sent me a message that wasn't to ask for something. She never included me in a photo, in a conversation, in an important moment of her life. Never. Not even once did she treat me like someone who mattered. I saw it, of course I saw it, but I told myself it was normal, that young people are like that with time things would change, that if I kept being consistent, if I kept being generous, if I kept being present without asking for anything in return, something would change. How wrong I was, because that Sunday at that table, surrounded by family, Iris not only humiliated me, she made me understand something I've been denying for years, something that hurt much more than any word she could say. And Elda, the woman I had chosen, the woman for whom I had rebuilt my life, instead of defending me, chose her daughter's side with one sentence, for words spoken with a calmness that still send a shiver down my spine when I remember it. You're not her father. One chapter ended there, another one began. And what came next, no one at that table saw coming. That night, I drove back home in silence. Elda was in the passenger seat. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. The only sound was the car's engine and the noise of the street passing by outside, as if the world kept spinning, completely oblivious to what had just happened at that table. From time to time, I glanced at her. She was looking out the window with that expression of someone who thinks everything is already resolved, of someone who said what she had to say and now simply expects the other person to accept it and move on as if nothing happened. As if the words she had spoken in front of her whole family were unimportant, a detail, a necessary correction. We got home. She went straight to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, sitting on the armchair with the light off, staring into the darkness. I wasn't furious, or maybe I was, but it was a cold fury. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that thinks. I started to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I started to remember. I remembered the first time Iris spoke to me in that tone. It was 3 years ago, in the kitchen of this very house. I asked her to turn down the music because I had an important work call. She looked at me as if I'd asked her for something absurd, as if my work, my obligations, my time had no value. And she said to me in that voice that already made me uncomfortable back then, "Relax, it's not a big deal." And she left. Elda was in the next room. She heard everything. She said nothing. I remembered another time, a dinner 2 years ago. Iris arrived late, sat at the table without saying hello, picked up her phone, and stared at the screen throughout the entire meal. At some point, I tried to include her in the conversation, to ask her something about university, about her plans. She answered with a monosyllable without looking up. Elda smiled uncomfortably and changed the subject. Nothing. I remembered Elda's birthday last year. I organized everything. I booked the restaurant, paid for dinner, bought the gift. Iris showed up with a handmade card, and everyone celebrated her as if she'd done something extraordinary. No one mentioned who had paid for the evening. No one looked at me. No one said anything, and I kept smiling. I kept paying. I kept quiet. Sitting in that dark living room that night, for the first time, I asked myself why I kept financing a life that ignored me. Why did I keep putting money, time, and energy into someone who saw me as an ATM with legs? Why did I tolerate my wife, the woman who supposedly loved me, using me as financial support for her daughter while denying me even the basic right to receive respect? And the answer I found in that darkness was uncomfortable because I allowed it. That's what I told myself that night, not with anger towards myself, but with a clarity I'd never had before. I allowed it every time I stayed quiet, every time I smiled when I should have spoken, every time I took out the card without asking for anything in return, every time I told Elda, it doesn't matter, she'll get over it, when Iris treated me badly. I built that pattern as much as they did, and that night I decided it was enough. I didn't decide with a slam of the door. I didn't decide by crying or shouting. I decided in silence, in the darkness of my own living room, with the same calm with which one decides to change paths after realizing they've been lost for too long. The next day, I got up early, before she woke up. I made myself a coffee. I sat at the dining room table, opened my computer, and started to work. Not on my usual work, on something else. The first thing I did was go to the university portal where Iris was studying. I looked for the payment section. I found the next semester's due date. It was $4,300. Deadline in 18 days. I stared at that screen for a moment. Then I closed the portal without paying. The second thing was to call the bank. I asked them to block the additional card that was in Iris's name. The operator asked me if there was a problem with the card. I told him no, that I simply wanted to cancel it, that it was my decision. The process took less than 10 minutes. The third thing was harder, not because it hurt to do it, but because it required coordination. Iris's apartment was in my name. I was the contract holder. That meant I could give notice to leave. I looked for the contract, reviewed the clauses, and wrote an email to the building manager notifying him that I would not be renewing at the end of the following month. Polite, direct, no drama. The fourth was the car. It was in my name. I had also bought it 2 years ago with the idea that Iris would use it while she studied. I called the insurance company, checked the status of the documentation, and made an appointment to transfer or recover the vehicle as appropriate. The fifth was the cell phone, a family plan that I paid for. Iris had a line on that plan. I went into the carrier's app and removed her from the contract. I did all of that before 9 in the morning, without telling anyone, without sending a message, without making a warning call, without the speech that a part of me wanted to give, because I understood something important that morning, sitting in the dark. People who don't respect you when you have all the power don't deserve a speech. They deserve consequences. And consequences don't need an explanation. When Elda came down for breakfast, she found me sitting with my coffee, reading something on my phone. She asked me if I wanted her to make eggs. I said yes. Thank you. We had breakfast together almost in silence. She didn't mention the night before. Neither did I. But something had changed between us, even though she didn't know it yet. That same afternoon, I got a message from Iris. The first one in weeks that wasn't to ask for something related to money. Well, actually, it was to ask for something related to money. She told me she needed me to transfer money for some university books, and that her card balance wasn't working. The card I had just canceled that morning. I read the message, left it on read. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another message arrived, this time with a different tone, more urgent, asking if there was a problem with the card, that the bank told her it was blocked, that she needed to know what had happened. I left it on read too, and that's when it all started, because what I didn't know yet, what I was about to discover in the following days, was that Iris and Elda's story had many more layers than I had seen, and that what happened at that table on Sunday wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of bad temper. It wasn't Iris being Iris. It was something planned, or at least allowed. And the difference between those two things was going to matter a lot more than I thought. The following days were strange. Strange because on the outside, everything seemed normal. Elda would get up, have breakfast, go to work. I'd do the same. We'd have dinner together, watch TV, sleep in the same bed. Anyone who had seen us from the outside would have thought we were a quiet couple with no major problems. But inside, something was shifting. Iris sent me 4 more messages that Monday. They started as questions about the card. Then they turned into demands, then into something bordering on a threat. She told me she had pending payments, that she couldn't be left without money so suddenly that I couldn't just disappear without warning. Without warning. That's what she wrote, that I couldn't disappear without warning. Me, who had been appearing every month for 6 years with the money for the apartment, the university, the car, the card, the cell phone, me, who had never disappeared for a single month. I was the one who was disappearing. I didn't reply to any of her messages. On Tuesday, Elda asked me at dinner if I'd had any problems with the bank. I told her no. Why? She said that Iris had told her card wasn't working. I looked her in the eyes and told her I'd canceled it. Just like that, without beating around the bush, without drama, just a fact. Elda put her fork down on her plate. She asked me why I'd done that without telling her anything. I told her because it was my card, that it was in my name, that I had opened it, and I could close it. There was a long, heavy silence. Then she told me that Iris depended on that card for her daily expenses, that how could I do something like that without consulting her, that it wasn't fair. I was quiet for a moment. I took a slow breath and asked her something I'd been wanting to ask for days. I asked her if she thought what happened on Sunday at her sister's table was fair. Silence. I asked her if she thought it was fair that her daughter humiliated me in front of the whole family. And she, instead of saying something to her, told me that I had no right to demand respect. More silence. I asked her if she had thought, even for a moment, about how I had felt sitting there, swallowing all that, while no one, absolutely no one, said a single word in my defense. Elda didn't answer any of those questions. What she did was get up from the table, pick up her plate, and tell me I was being dramatic, that what happened on Sunday was a misunderstanding, that Iris was young. That's how young people were, that I tended to exaggerate things. Dramatic. That word hung in the kitchen after she left. I finished eating alone. I washed my plate, poured myself a glass of water, and at that moment, standing in front of the sink, looking out the window at the empty street, something finally clicked into place inside me. It wasn't anger, it was clarity, because I understood that Elda wasn't going to validate what I felt. Not that day, probably never. And not because she was a bad person, or at least not only for that reason, but because validating me meant admitting that her daughter had been wrong. And that was something Elda wasn't willing to do. She never had been. And that's when I started to see everything differently. I started to remember moments that I had previously filed away as misunderstandings, small incidents that at the time seemed isolated, but now, seen together, formed a very clear pattern. Like that time 2 years ago when Iris told a friend of hers in front of me that her mom had married someone who paid her bills. I was 2 meters away. I heard it perfectly. Elda was nearby too. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them looked at me. It was as if I wasn't there, or like that other time when I went to pick Iris up from university because her car was in the shop. I waited 40 minutes in the parking lot. When she finally came out, she was with a group of friends. She saw me, hesitated for a moment, and then said something to them in a low voice that made everyone laugh before getting into the car without introducing me to anyone. The whole way back, she didn't even say thank you. Or like the last family gathering 3 months before the Sunday that changed everything. When Amalia, Elda's sister, asked Iris how her studies were going, and Iris replied that they were fine, that thanks to her mom, who worked so hard for her. Only her mom, as if the money that paid for her university fell from the sky, as if I didn't exist. Elda didn't correct that either. She never corrected it. And that's what I understood that night, standing in front of the sink. It wasn't an oversight, it was a decision. The next day, I call my brother, Lissandro. Lissandro is 4 years younger than me, but he's always had a way of seeing things that I admire, direct, unfiltered, but without cruelty. I told him everything about Sunday, about the card, about the conversation with Elda. He listened without interrupting. When I finished speaking, there was a pause, and then he said something that hit me hard. He told me he had seen it for a long time, that every time we got together, every time I was with Elda and Iris, there was something that didn't add up, a dynamic that had always seemed strange to him, that I gave and gave, and they received as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And that he had never said anything to me because he didn't want to meddle, but that if I was asking now, the answer was yes, that I was right, that I had been right for a long time. Sometimes you need someone from the outside to tell you what your own eyes have already seen, but your heart didn't want to accept. That night, after talking to Lissandro, I went on my computer and started to review something I've been putting off for a while. My bank statements of the last 3 years. I opened them one by one, month by month, and I started adding it up. University for $1,300 per semester, 2 semesters a year, $8,600 annually. Apartment, $800 monthly, $9,600 a year. Car. The down payment had been $0,000, plus insurance, plus maintenance, plus the times Iris took it to the shop for dent she never quite explained. Card. An average of $400 monthly, for $1,800 a year. Cell phone, $80 monthly, $960 a year. Just in the last 3 years, not counting the first 2 years of the marriage when I also helped, although to a lesser extent, I had put more than $72,000 into Iris's life. $2,000. I stared at that number for a good while. Not because I regretted spending it, but because at that moment, I understood exactly what that number meant. It meant that I had financed the life of someone who considered me invisible, that I had invested the equivalent of years of work in a relationship where I didn't exist unless it was as a source of money. And as I looked at that number, something else crossed my mind. A conversation I had overheard months ago. A conversation between Elda and Iris in the kitchen. One night, when I had arrived earlier than expected and neither of them had heard me come in. At the time, I hadn't given it much importance. I had filed it away as one of those things you prefer not to analyze too much. But now, with everything that had happened, with the numbers in front of me, with Lissandro's words still echoing in my head, I began to remember exactly what they had said, and the more I remembered, the colder my blood ran. It was a Tuesday night. It was cold outside, and I had come home earlier than usual because a meeting I had scheduled was canceled at the last minute. I came in through the back door, the one that leads directly to the kitchen, because I had left something in the car in the morning, and I came in that way without thinking. I heard them before I saw them. Elda and Iris were sitting at the kitchen table. They were talking in low voices, but not so low that I couldn't hear from the hallway. I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe something in the tone of their voices told me, too. That kind of tone people use when they're talking about something they don't want others to hear. Iris was talking about money. That wasn't new. Iris always talked about money when she talked to her mom, but this time it was different. This time she wasn't asking. This time she was calculating. She was telling Elda that she needed me to pay for her lab materials next semester, which were almost $0.00 on top of tuition, that the apartment rent was going up next month, and they needed to figure out how to handle that. That her card was almost maxed out, and she needed an increased limit or a new one. And Elda was answering her calmly, in detail, as if they were planning a budget together. She was telling her that with Moises, you had to be patient, that he was generous, but sometimes he got sensitive, that it was best not to ask for everything at once, but to go little by little, that if Iris treated him a little better, if she smiled at him more often, if she included him in conversation from time to time, he would be easier to handle. Easy to handle. Those were the exact words my wife used to refer to me. I stood frozen in that hallway, not breathing, with the cold from outside still on my clothes, and a very different cold spreading inside me. Iris laughed, a short, almost mocking laugh, and told her mom she didn't understand how I didn't realize that it was too easy, that you just had to let him believe he was important and he'd keep putting up the money without a fuss. Elda told her that's how men like me worked, that they needed to feel needed, that as long as I felt I was doing something big, that I was being the provider, the responsible one, the man of the house, I would stay there without questions, without problems. Then there was a silence, and then Elda said something else, something that at the time, hidden in that hallway, I decided not to fully process. I stored it in a corner of my mind and covered it with excuses. I told myself I had misunderstood, that I was misinterpreting the context, that it surely wasn't as bad as it sounded. What she said was this, that if one day I got difficult, if one day I got tired and started setting conditions, there was always the option of reminding me that Iris wasn't my daughter, that alone was enough to put me in my place, to remind me what my real role in that family was. A real role, the one of someone who pays, who doesn't have an opinion, who doesn't demand, who has no right to claim anything, because, after all, he's not the father. I walked away from the hallway without them seeing me. I went out the way I had come in. I sat in the car in the darkness of the garage for almost 20 minutes, and then I went into the house as if nothing had happened. I said hello to them. I made myself a drink. I watched TV for a while and went to bed, and I buried that conversation so deep inside me that I almost managed to convince myself it hadn't happened. Almost, because the following months continued the same. I kept paying, I kept quiet, I kept being the easy-to-handle man who needed to feel necessary. And every time Iris snubbed me, every time Elda downplayed something that hurt me, I remembered that hallway and told myself it wasn't a big deal, that all families had their dynamics, that I was exaggerating, until Sunday, until Iris humiliated me in front of everyone, and Elda used the exact words I had heard her plan months before. "You're not her father. Don't demand respect from him." It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't a spontaneous reaction of a mother defending her daughter. It was a script, a strategy they had built together in that kitchen while I was paralyzed in the hallway, not wanting to believe what I was hearing. And when I truly understood it, when I put it all together sitting in front of my bank statements that night, something finally broke inside me. Not violently, not with tears or with fists on the table. It broke slowly, with an almost surgical calm, like when you accept something you already knew but didn't want to name. They had used me for 6 years, methodically, patiently, with a strategy specifically designed to keep me in that place, generous, quiet, and convinced I was doing the right thing. And the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part wasn't the $2,000 I had calculated the night before. The worst part was that I had given those years believing I was building something real, a family, a home, a relationship where I mattered. None of that was true. I was a function, a bank account with a name, and the moment I started to be inconvenient, the moment I dared to ask for something as basic as respect, they reminded me of my place. I took a deep breath, opened a new document on my computer, and started to write, not a letter, not a message for Elda or Iris, but a list, a clear, orderly list of everything I had to do in the following days, because I had decided something important that night. Something that went far beyond canceling a card or not paying for a semester. I had decided to take my life back, not in pieces, not halfway, completely. And for that, I needed to move carefully, without announcements, without premature confrontations, without giving them time to react or prepare. The first thing on my list was to talk to a lawyer. I needed to understand exactly what my legal situation was within the marriage, what assets were mine, what debts we shared, what a separation entailed in concrete terms. I needed to know what cards I held before putting any on the table. The second was to review all the shared accounts with Elda, the household expenses, the utilities, the subscriptions. I wanted to have a complete map of everything I was financially supporting before moving any pieces. The third was to call Lissandro, not to tell him about the hallway conversation yet, but to ask him for something specific, something I was going to need in the coming days. The fourth was to be patient. That was the hardest part, because a part of me wanted to confront Elda that very night. I wanted to sit in front of her and tell her I knew, that I had heard everything, that I remembered perfectly every word she had said in that kitchen. But I didn't, because I had learned something important in those days, that anger acts fast and loses, that calm acts slowly and wins. And I didn't want to lose. I closed the computer, turned off the light, got into the same bed as Elda, who was already sleeping with her back to me, and I stared at the ceiling in the dark. Tomorrow would be another day, and I already knew exactly what I was going to do with it. But what I didn't know yet was that while I was planning in silence, something else was happening. Something Iris had set in motion without imagining the consequences, something that was going to come to light in the following days in a way that none of us expected, and that was going to change everything once again, but this time in my favor. The lawyer's name was Enrique. I had known him for years, not as a close friend, but as one of those acquaintances with whom you maintain a cordial relationship of mutual respect, without much depth. We had run into each other at some business meetings, we had shared a couple of lunches, and I knew he was good at what he did. Discreet, methodical, one of those who listen before they speak. I called him on a Wednesday morning from the car before going into the office. I told him I needed a private consultation, that it was personal, that I preferred it to be outside his usual office, in some quiet place where we could talk without interruptions. I didn't give him more details over the phone. He didn't ask. He just told me we could meet that same afternoon at a cafe near his office at 6. I arrived 5 minutes early. I ordered coffee. I waited. When Enrique arrived and sat down in front of me, he looked at me with that expression lawyers have when they know what's coming is serious. He didn't say anything. He just waited. And I told him everything, not in a disorganized or emotional way. I told it as I had learned to tell things in those days, calmly, with facts, with dates. I told him about the marriage, about Iris, about the years of funding, about the figures I had calculated. I told him about Sunday, about Elda's words, about the conversation I had overheard in the hallway months ago. I told him about the decisions I had already made and those I still didn't know how to make. Enrique listened to me without interrupting. He took some notes in a small notebook he took from his inside pocket. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds, looking at what he had written. Then he looked up and spoke to me with the same calm with which I had spoken to him. He told me the first thing I needed to understand was that my legal situation was more solid than I thought, that the assets I had acquired before the marriage were still mine, that the payments I had made on behalf of Iris. Since there was no legal adoption agreement or formal financial responsibility, were considered voluntary expenses, which meant I could stop them at any time without any legal consequences. That no one could force me to continue financing the life of an adult who was not my biological or legal daughter. Then he talked to me about the joint account with Elda. He explained what I could and couldn't do with it. He gave me a clear map of the steps I should follow if I ever decided to formalize a separation, without pressuring me, without telling me what I should decide, just giving me the information I needed to make my own decisions with my eyes open. I left that cafe 2 hours later, feeling different, not lighter exactly, but firmer, like when you've been walking on unstable ground for a long time and suddenly you step on something solid. That feeling that the ground holds, that you're not going to sink. That night, when I got home, Elda asked me how my day had been. I told her it was good, that I'd had a long meeting. She nodded and continued chopping vegetables for dinner. Normal, completely normal on the outside. But that night, while she slept, I stayed awake reviewing the documents Enrique had asked me to gather. Bank statements, deeds, contracts. I was building an organized folder with everything I might need. Not in a hurry, carefully. It was during that review that I found something I didn't expect. I was reviewing the joint account transactions for the last 6 months when I noticed something strange, a monthly transfer that I didn't remember authorizing. It wasn't a huge amount. It was $300 every month, leaving our shared account to an account I didn't recognize. I stopped. I checked further back, 6 months, 8, 12. The transfer was there every month, punctual, without exception, for over a year. Always the same amount, always to the same destination. I took down the account number and saved it on a separate piece of paper. I didn't say anything to Elda. The next day, I called the bank and asked if they could give me information about that transfer. They told me it was an account registered in Iris's name. I was silent on the other end of the phone for a moment that probably lasted less than 10 seconds, but to me, it seemed much longer. Elda was transferring money to Iris from our joint account every month without telling me anything. $300 monthly, which added up to $3,600 a year, and in a year and a half that this transfer had been active, it was $5,400 that had come out of an account that was as much mine as it was hers, without my knowledge, without my being consulted, without anyone telling me a single thing. I hung up the phone, sat down, took a breath, and remembered something Enrique had told me the afternoon before, almost at the end of our conversation. He had told me that in these situations, the most important thing was not to act out of anger, that anger makes noise and noise alerts the other side, that if I wanted to move well, I had to move in silence until the right moment. So I did nothing. I saved the information, added it to my folder, and went on with my day. That week, I called Lisandro. I told him everything, not just about the hallway conversation, which I hadn't told him about yet, but also about the transfers. I heard him exhale slowly on the other end of the phone, like someone who takes a blow they weren't expecting but deep down had a feeling was coming. He told me I needed to be careful, that he knew Elda well enough to know that if she felt cornered, she could become unpredictable, that it was best to have everything ready before making any visible moves. I asked him if he could help me with something specific. He said yes, whatever it was. What I needed from Lisandro wasn't money or influence. It was something much simpler. I needed a place I could go when the time came to leave, a space that was mine, even if temporarily, while I organized everything else. Lisandro had a small apartment that he used sporadically when he traveled for work. It was on the same side of the city where I worked, empty most of the time. He told me it was mine whenever I needed it. No questions, no conditions. I thanked him and started moving some things slowly without Elda noticing. Clothes I didn't wear often, important documents, small things that I carried in my briefcase over several days, so there would be no suitcase, no sudden movement that could draw attention. Meanwhile, the silence between Iris and me remained intact. She had stopped messaging me directly. Now, she used Elda as an intermediary. Elda would casually mention at dinner that Iris needed this or that the apartment, that the university, that the expenses. I would listen, nod vaguely, and change the subject. Elda started to get tense. I noticed it in little things, in how she looked at me when she thought I wasn't looking, in how she checked her phone more frequently when we were together, in how some nights she stayed in the kitchen longer than usual after dinner, as if waiting for me to say something. But I didn't say anything. I remained the same on the outside, calm, polite, present, and on the inside I was building. It was a Thursday night when something unexpected happened. I was in the living room reading when I heard Elda's phone ring in the bedroom. She was in the bathroom. The phone rang 3 times in a row, which meant consecutive calls, someone insisting. Elda came out of the bathroom quickly, grabbed the phone, and left the room to answer. She spoke in a low voice, very low, but the house wasn't that big. I didn't hear everything, just fragments, but what I heard was enough. I heard Amelia's name, Elda's sister, and I heard Elda tell her that she hadn't been able to get me to reactivate the card yet, that she was handling the situation, that she needed a little more time handling the situation. Those words again. To them, I was always a situation to be handled, a problem to be solved, a variable to be controlled. Never a person, never a man who had given 6 years of his life, 2,000 nights of work, energy, patience, love in his own way, everything he had to give to a family that saw him as a resource. That night, I didn't sleep well, not because I was anxious, but because something inside me was finishing igniting. A determination that no longer had doubts, that no longer needed more time to be convinced, that was simply ready. The next day, early, I called Enrique. I told him I was ready to take the next step. I told him I needed him to prepare the documents, and I told him something else, something I had been thinking about for days and had finally decided with total clarity. I told him I didn't want this to end in private. I didn't want a quiet conversation at home, without witnesses, where they could distort what happened later. I didn't want to be the villain in 6 months of a story they would tell their own way. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the people who had been at that table on Sunday, the same ones who had seen me stay silent, the same ones who hadn't said a single word in my defense, to be present when I put everything on the table. Enrique listened to me and said that could be done, that we just needed to choose the right moment. And the right moment turned out to be closer than I thought. The opportunity came on its own, as important things often do, unannounced, not planned to the last detail, but presenting itself at the moment one is ready to receive it. And I had been ready for weeks. It was Amalia who created it without knowing. She called Elda on a Friday morning to invite us to a dinner at her house the following Saturday. A family gathering, she said, something quiet, no special occasion, just to get together. Elda mentioned it to me that same afternoon with a naturalness that I found almost ironic, as if nothing had happened, as if it were any invitation to any house with any people. I told her yes, we'd go. Elda seemed surprised. I think she expected me to put up some resistance, to say I had something else on, to look for an excuse, but I didn't. I said yes with the same calm with which I would have said anything else, and continued with what I was doing. That night, I wrote to Enrique to let him know the date. He already had the documents ready. He'd had them ready for days. He was just waiting for my signal. I also wrote to Lissandro. I told him Saturday was the day, that I needed him to be available in case I needed him afterwards, that he didn't have to do anything special, just be nearby. He replied immediately. He said he'd be there. The days that followed were strange in a way that's hard to explain. On the outside, everything was the same. Elda and I had breakfast together. We talked about unimportant things. We watched TV at night. Iris still didn't write to me directly. The silence between us had become so habitual it almost seemed normal. But inside, I was completely alert. I checked everything one more time. The documents I had gathered, the bank statements with the transfers Elda had made without telling me, the receipts from the university, from the apartment, from the car, everything in order, everything clear, everything ready to be presented at the right moment. I also prepared something else, something Enrique had suggested, and that at first it seemed excessive, but that with time, I understood was necessary. A letter, not an emotional letter, not a letter of reproach or farewell. A formal letter drafted with Enrique's help that documented my decisions in a clear and orderly manner. The cancellation of all financial commitments to Iris. The formal notification that I would not be renewing the apartment contract. The confirmation that the vehicle would be repossessed. The definitive suspension of any additional expenses related to her education or daily life. No insults, no lengthy explanations, just facts, just decisions. Enrique had told me that this document was important not only as communication, but as protection, that if at any point someone tried to build a narrative that I had acted impulsively or unfairly, that paper existed to prove the contrary, that every decision I made was documented, had a date, and was in response to specific reasons. I kept in my folder along with everything else. Saturday arrived. I got up early as always. I had a quiet breakfast. I got dressed without rushing. Elda was in a good mood that day, talking about what we were going to bring to dinner, asking if I prefer to bring wine or a dessert. I told her whatever she decided was fine. She smiled. In the car, on the way to Amelia's house, Elda talked almost the whole time about her week, about something that happened at her work, about something Amalia had told her on the phone. I listened, responded when appropriate, and watched the street. Inside, I was completely calm. It wasn't the calm of someone who feels nothing. It was the calm of someone who has already decided, of someone who no longer has doubts, of someone who knows exactly what is going to happen in the next few hours and has made peace with it. We arrived at Amelia's house around 7 in the evening. Iris was already there. She looked at me when I came in. I held her gaze for a moment, without hostility, without warmth either. I just looked at her. Then I greeted Amalia, I greeted Mauricio, her husband, I greeted the others who were there. I behaved exactly as I would have on any other Saturday of any other year. The dinner started well. General conversation, food, the usual noise of a family gathering. I participated when I was included, I listened when I wasn't, and I waited. It was after dinner, when they had cleared the plates and only the glasses and desserts were on the table, when Amalia said something that opened the door I needed. She talked about Iris, about how well she was doing in university, about how proud her mom was. And then, with that naturalness of someone who doesn't measure their words, she said to Iris what a lucky girl she was to have her mom who sacrificed so much for her. Only her mom. Again, Iris smiled. Elda too. And no one, absolutely no one at that table, said anything different. I let 3 seconds pass. Then I put my glass on the table carefully, without making a sound, and I spoke. I said I was glad they brought up the subject, that I also wanted to talk about it. I said it was true that Iris had had a lot of support to get where she was, and that I thought it was important for everyone at that table to know where that support had come from. Not to claim credit, but because the truth matters. Always, the tone of the table changed immediately. Elda looked at me. Iris looked at me. Amalia frowned slightly, not yet understanding where this was going. I took out the envelope I had brought in the inside pocket of my jacket. I put it on the table, and I began to speak calmly, with facts, with dates and numbers. I told them that for the last 6 years, I had financed Iris's university for $1,300 per semester, 2 semesters a year for 6 years. I told them the total amount bluntly. I told them that I had also paid for her apartment, $800 a month, her car, $2,000 down payment plus insurance and maintenance, her credit card, her cell phone plan, and that in total, adding everything up carefully, the figure exceeded $2,000. No one spoke. Mauricio was staring at the table. Amalia was looking at Elda. Elda was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her before. It wasn't anger yet. It was something more like fear. Iris had her eyes fixed on her glass. I continued. I told them that I had done all of that gladly, that I had never done it expecting public thanks or recognition, that I had done it because I loved Elda and because I believe that a family is built with presence and commitment. That for years, I tried to be part of that family in the only way they let me be. By providing, I paused. Then I opened the envelope and took out the documents. I put them on the table so everyone could see them without needing to touch them. The bank statements, the receipts, and something else, something that made Elda turn pale the moment she saw it. The record of the transfers $300 a month for 18 months from our joint account to Iris's account. Without my knowledge, without my authorization, $5. For 100 that had come out of an account that was as much mine as Elda's, in secret, as if I were someone you could quietly steal from because he's never going to find out anyway. Elda opened her mouth, then closed it. Iris still didn't look up. Amalia looked at her sister with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was something more complicated, like someone seeing something they'd rather not have known confirmed. Mauricio cleared his throat and looked away. I kept talking. I told them that the previous Sunday, in this same family, my wife had told me in front of everyone that I wasn't Iris's father and therefore had no right to demand respect. That it was true, that I wasn't her father, but that for 6 years I had acted as if I were. With everything that implied financially, and that the moment I decided to ask for something as basic as consideration, I was reminded that I didn't have that right. I paused again. I looked directly at Elda and told her she was right, that I wasn't Iris's father, and that for that reason, from that moment on, I would stop acting as if I were. I told her that Iris's apartment had an eviction notice, that the university semester was not going to be paid, that the car was being repossessed, that the card had already been canceled for days, and that the $400 from the unauthorized transfers were being reviewed by my lawyer to determine the next steps. Elda stood up. She started talking fast, in a voice I didn't recognize. She told me I was exaggerating everything, that I was misinterpreting the transfers, that she was planning to tell me that things weren't as I was presenting them, that there was context the others didn't know. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't raise my voice. I waited for her to finish, and when she finished, I said only one thing. I told her she was right, that there was always context, and that the context was exactly what I had just presented on that table. Silence. A silence that filled every corner of that room. Iris still wasn't looking at me. Amelia's eyes were shining, though I couldn't have said if it was from discomfort or something else. Mauricio was still looking away, and Elda, standing with her hands on the table, for the first time since I had known her, had nothing more to say. I gathered my documents, put them back in the envelope, wiped my mouth with a napkin, stood up, looked at them all one last time without anger, without exaggerated triumph, with that calm I'd built over weeks, and that at that moment was all I needed. And I left. I walked out of that house, and the night air hit me in the face. It was a fresh, clean air, one of those you don't notice on normal days, but that at certain moments feel like something necessary, like when you've been in a closed room for too long and you finally open a window. I stopped for a moment on the sidewalk in front of the car, not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to hold on to that moment, to that exact feeling of standing outside with the documents in my pocket, with the silence of that table still echoing somewhere inside me. I wanted to remember it well, not with anger, not with sadness, just remember it. Then I opened the car, got in, and started it. I drove slowly, without music, with the windows slightly open, thinking about everything and nothing at the same time, about the 6 years that had passed, about the decisions I had made believing they were the right ones, about the man I had been at that table the previous Sunday, quiet, swallowing everything, and about the man I had been tonight, standing with the truth on the table and a firm voice. They weren't that different, really. They were still the same man, just that one of them now knew his worth. I called Lissandro from the car. He answered on the second ring. I told him it was over, that I had left, that I was okay. I heard him exhale slowly on the other end, like someone who had been holding their breath for hours. He told me to come to his apartment, that he already had some food ready, that I didn't have to be alone that night if I didn't want to. I told him I was on my way. When I arrived, Lissandro opened the door without saying anything. He gave me one of those hugs that men of our generation don't give each other often, but that when they do, mean exactly what they're supposed to mean. Then he pointed to the table where there were 2 steaming plates and a bottle of water and told me to sit down. We ate almost in silence for the first few minutes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who don't need to fill the space with words to be present for each other. Then I told him everything in detail. About the dinner, about the documents, about the transfers I put on the table, about Elda getting up and starting to talk fast, about the final silence. He listened to everything without interrupting me, with that way of listening of his that I had always found to be one of his best traits. When I finished, he nodded slowly. He told me I had done the right thing, not in a grand or dramatic way, just that I had done the right thing. Sometimes that's all you need to hear. That night, I slept at Lissandro's apartment, deeply, without interruptions, in a way I hadn't slept in weeks. I don't know if it was the accumulated exhaustion or simply that something that had been tense inside me for a long time finally let go. Probably both. The next morning, the messages started. The first one arrived at 7:15. It was from Elda. It said we needed to talk, that last night had been a mistake, that I had misunderstood everything, that the transfers had an explanation, that please call her. I didn't reply. At 8, another one arrived with a different tone, less conciliatory, more urgent. She told me I couldn't just disappear like that we had a marriage, that there were things to resolve, that what I had done the night before in front of her family had been humiliating and that I knew it. Humiliating. That word stopped me for a moment. The same word I could have used the previous Sunday, sitting at that table, listening to Iris talk about me, as if I were an object, listening to Elda tell me I had no right to demand respect, but I hadn't used it. Back then, I had kept it to myself, and now she was using it to describe the moment when I simply presented facts in front of witnesses. I put the phone away without replying. At 9:30, a message from Iris arrived. It was the first one she had sent me directly in weeks. It said she needed to know what was going to happen with the apartment, that she had to organize her things, that what I was doing wasn't fair, that she had nothing to do with the financial decisions, that was between her mom and me, and that it wasn't right for her to pay the consequences. I read it twice. She had nothing to do with it. I thought about the conversation in the kitchen, about her voice calculating how much she could ask me for that semester, about her laugh when she said I was too easy, about her expression on Sunday at that table when she pointed at me and said what she said. Nothing to do with it. I put the phone away. I called Enrique that morning to tell him how the previous night had gone. He listened attentively, asked a few precise questions, and told me that everything I had done was well-framed, that the documents I had presented at dinner were mine, that I had every right to show them, and that if Elda tried to argue anything about the transfers, the bank record spoke for itself. Then he asked me if I had made a final decision about the marriage. I was silent for a moment, and then I told him yes, that I needed him to prepare the papers. There was something strange about saying it out loud. Not relief exactly, not pain either, but something in between. Like when you close a door, you know you'll never open again. There's a final click that sounds different from all the others. Enrique told me he would have it ready in the next few days, that in the meantime, I should avoid long, confrontational conversations with Elda, that if she insisted on talking, I should be brief, that the details would be handled through him. I followed his advice. That afternoon, after talking with Enrique, I went to the house to get the rest of my things. Elda was there. She looked at me when I came in with an expression that mixed anger and something that could have been regret, although I was never good at telling the two apart in her. She asked if we could talk. I told her yes, that we had 5 minutes. She sat down, looked at me, and started telling me that the transfers weren't what they seemed, that she just wanted to help her daughter without me feeling it was an extra burden, that she knew I already gave a lot and didn't want to ask for more. That's why she had handled it that way, discreetly. Discreetly. I asked her if discretion was the right word to describe moving money from a joint account without telling the other holder. She didn't answer that. She kept talking. She told me that what happened on Sunday had been a mistake, that Iris had gone too far, that she had also been wrong to say what she said, that she was sorry, that we could work on this together, that we could go to therapy, that things could get better if we both made an effort. I listened until she finished, and then I told her something I'd thought many times in those weeks, but had never said out loud. I told her that the problem wasn't Sunday, that Sunday was just the moment I stopped ignoring what I already knew, that the problem went back much further. To every time Iris disrespected me, and she said nothing. To every time I asked for something basic and was reminded that I had no right, to the conversation in the kitchen I had overheard months ago, where they both talked about me as if I were a resource to be managed and not a person to live with. Elda froze when I mentioned the conversation of the kitchen, a different kind of stillness, one that said she didn't expect that she didn't know I had heard it, that at that moment she understood there was no way to reframe this, to explain it, to downplay it. I told her I didn't need her to answer anything, that I wasn't there to argue, that I just wanted her to know that I knew, and that from that moment on, my lawyer would handle everything else. I went to the bedroom, took the things I'd left, put them in a bag, and left. Elda didn't follow me. She didn't say anything else. In the hallway, before leaving, I stopped for a second in front of the mirror we had hanging by the door. I don't know why I did it. I guess I wanted to see myself, to see what a man looked like at that exact moment in his life, at that breaking point that was also a starting point. What I saw didn't surprise me. I saw someone who was tired, but it was an honest tiredness, the kind that sleeps well. Not the tiredness of carrying something that doesn't belong to him, but that of having walked a long way and finally deciding to stop. I left. The following days were a mix of paperwork, silence, and a calm that at first felt strange, but that I gradually learned to welcome. Enrique moved forward with the papers. Iris's apartment had a lease expiration date. The car was repossessed without major complications. The joint account with Elda was separated through the corresponding legal process. There were messages from Elda, from Iris, at one point even from Amalia, who wrote to tell me she understood what had happened and that she was sorry. I didn't know what to do with that message. I left it unanswered for days. I just let it be. Mauricio called me one afternoon, which surprised me. He wasn't someone I had a close relationship with. We spoke briefly. He told me he had known for a long time that things weren't right, that what had happened at dinner hadn't surprised him, that he hoped I was okay. I thanked him for the call. It was one of the few I received in those days that made me feel that not everything was upside down. And in the midst of all these movements, amidst the paperwork and the silences and the nights at Lissandro's apartment, I realized something I didn't expect. I realized it had been a long time since I'd felt like this, light, not happy yet, not whole yet, but light, like when you stop carrying something so heavy you had forgotten how much it weighed, and suddenly you feel your own arms again. That feeling, I discovered, was the beginning of something, not the end of a story, the beginning of another. The separation process took 3 months to be finalized. 3 months that weren't easy, but that weren't what I had expected either. I had imagined something more turbulent, more confrontational, more full of midnight calls and angry messages and scenes you don't want to remember later. But it wasn't like that. It was more like dismantling something carefully, piece by piece, with the necessary coldness not to break yourself in the process. Enrique handled everything with a precision I was grateful for what I told him. Every document in its place, every step in the right order, every conversation I had to have with Elda went through him first, which saved me exactly the kind of emotional wear and tear I couldn't afford at that moment. Elda hired her own lawyer a week after I filed the papers. I expected it. What I didn't expect was that her initial position was to claim compensation for the years of marriage, arguing that she had contributed emotionally to the household and that my sudden departure left her in a difficult situation. Enrique told me this without drama, with the same calm with which he told me everything. He asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told him to proceed with the facts, and the facts were clear. The bank statements were clear. The documentation of everything I had financed during the marriage was clear. The unauthorized transfers were clear. There wasn't much room to build an alternative narrative when the numbers said exactly what they said. Elda's lawyer moderated his claims in the following weeks. We reached an agreement that didn't leave me satisfied in the emotional sense, because no agreement of that kind leaves you satisfied, but that was fair in the practical sense. What was mine remained mine. What was shared was divided reasonably, and the unauthorized transfers were acknowledged and deducted from the settlement process. The day I signed the final papers, Enrique shook my hand and told me that I had handled all this with more composure than most of the people who came through his office. He didn't say it to flatter me. He said it as a fact, and I took it as such. I left his office, got into my car, and sat there for a moment without starting it. I don't know how long I was there, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. With my hands on the steering wheel, looking at the windshield, letting that moment exist without rushing it. 3 months ago, I was a man sitting in the darkness of his living room with the cold anger of someone who has just understood he's been used for years. Now I was a man sitting in the car in front of his lawyer's office, with the papers signed, with his life in order, with the future completely open. It wasn't the same. I started the car and drove to the apartment I had rented 2 weeks earlier. I was no longer at Lysandros. I had found my own place, small, in a quiet building with a large window overlooking a tree-lined street. The first day I saw it, I knew it was the right one, not because it was luxurious or special, but because it was quiet. And at that moment in my life, quiet was exactly what I needed. I furnished it slowly, with pleasure, without rushing, choosing each thing with the peace of mind of someone who knows that what he puts there is his and will remain his. There's nothing more like reclaiming your own life than furnishing a room where no one else has an opinion on where everything goes. Lysandro helped me the first weekend. We carried boxes, assembled furniture, laughed at the impossible instructions of things that never have enough screws. It was a good day, one of those you save without knowing you're saving it, and then find when you need it most. That night, sitting on the floor of the still half-empty apartment with a pizza and 2 beers, Lysandro looked at me and asked me how I was. Not as a polite question, as a real question. I told him I was fine, and I meant it, perhaps for the first time in months. He said he could tell. Then he said something else. He told me he had seen me giving and giving and giving for years, and that he had always had the feeling that I gave more than I received, not just with Elda and Iris, but in general, that I was one of those men who believe that if they try hard enough, if they are generous enough, if they don't ask for too much, things will work out on their own. And that he hoped this process had taught me that effort without reciprocity isn't a virtue, it's exhaustion. I thought about that for a long time after Lysandro left that night, because he was right. I had built an identity around being the one who gives, the one who supports, the one who doesn't complain. And for years, that identity had seemed like something to be proud of. The responsible man, the present man, the one who delivers. But at some point, without me realizing it, that identity had become a trap. Because the people around me didn't see me as someone generous. They saw me as someone who will never say no, as someone who will always be there providing, no matter how they treat him, no matter what he gets in return. And as long as I remained that man, they would never have a reason to change. That's what I learned in those 3 months, not just about Elda and Iris, but about myself. The weeks following the signing of the papers were of a calm that I found hard to inhabit at first. I was so used to the constant tension, the permanent vigilance to that state of silent alert I had maintained for months, that when all of that disappeared, I didn't know what to do with the space it left behind. I went back to work with a clarity I hadn't had in a long time. I realized that for the last few years, part of my mental energy was always somewhere else. On Iris's expenses, on the household dynamics, on the conversations I hadn't had but knew I would have to have at some point. All of that took up space. And when that space was freed up, my work improved in a way that even my partners noticed. One of them, an older man whom I greatly respect, told me one day that I looked different, that he didn't know what had happened, but that whatever had changed in my personal life, I should keep it, that a calm man thinks better than a man at war. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I remembered having in months. I started doing things I had put off for years, small but significant things. I resumed the habit of walking in the mornings before going to the office. I started reading at night, something I'd stopped doing without realizing it. I called friends I had lost touch with, not because there had been a fight, but because daily life with Elda had shrunk my social world in ways I hadn't noticed while it was happening. It was on one of those calls, one Wednesday afternoon, that a longtime friend asked if I'd be willing to go to a small dinner he was organizing for the following weekend. Quiet people, he said, nothing special, just a group of people who get along and hadn't seen each other in a while. I said yes. I went, and that night, sitting at that table with people who made me laugh without effort, without tension, without needing to calculate every word, I realized something that hit me in a way I didn't expect. I realized I missed this, that I had missed this for years without knowing I missed it. The lightness, the conversation with no hidden agenda, the company that charges you nothing for existing. I got to my apartment that night feeling different. Not different in the sense that something had suddenly changed, but different in the sense that something that had been off for a long time was slowly coming back on. And it was in that week, in those quiet, clean days of my new life, that I received a notification I didn't expect. A message from Malia. It wasn't the first. She had written to me before, and I had left it unanswered. But this one was different. It was longer, more careful with its words. She told me she understood if I didn't want to have any contact with that part of her family, that she would understand perfectly, but that there was something she wanted me to know, something that weighed on her, and that if I was willing to read what she had to say, she would appreciate it. I read it 3 times. Then I sat for a while, thinking about whether I wanted to know what Amalia had to say. A part of me said no, that I'd already closed that door, that whatever was behind that message could only complicate a calm that had cost me a lot to build. But another part, the part that always needs to understand things to the core, the part that isn't satisfied with incomplete versions, that part wanted to know. I replied. I told her she could tell me what she had to tell me. And what Amalia told me in the following hours was something I hadn't considered as a possibility. Something that changed certain details of the story, although it didn't change the story itself. Something that explained some things, and at the same time made me understand that what I had experienced was even more calculated than I had believed. What Amalia told me was about the origin of it all, about how it really started, and about something Elda had said long before I appeared in her life. Amalia wrote to me for almost an hour, not continuously, but in blocks like someone who writes a paragraph, thinks about it, decides to send it, and then waits to see if the other person is still there before continuing. There was something in that way of writing that told me what she was telling me was difficult for her, that it wasn't something she had decided to do lightly. I read everything without interrupting her. She told me that Elda had for years had a way of seeing relationships that she, as a sister, had tried to point out to her many times without success, a way that Amalia described with a word that stuck with me. She called it transactional. Elda saw relationships as exchanges, as agreements where each party had a role, and as long as each one fulfilled their role, everything worked. She told me that before I appeared in Elda's life, she had had another long relationship with a man who had also financed a large part of her and Iris's life for several years, that when that man started setting conditions, asking for reciprocity, wanting something more than the role of a silent provider, Elda ended the relationship, and that what came after, the period when Elda was single before she met me, hadn't been exactly as Elda had told me. She had told me she had been single by choice, that she had needed time for herself and for Iris, that she hadn't wanted to let anyone else into their lives until she was sure. The reality, according to Amalia, was that she had been actively looking, that in several conversations with her, with Amalia, she had spoken quite directly about what she needed in her next relationship. Someone stable, someone generous, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions, someone who would feel lucky to be with her and therefore wouldn't demand too much in return. Amalia wrote that when Elda called her to tell her she had met someone, she asked her what he was like, and Elda replied with these exact words that Amalia remembered because they had made her uncomfortable ever since, that he was exactly what she needed. Hardworking, no children, with a good financial situation, and with that need that single men have to feel part of something. I stared at that sentence for a long moment because it was true. I had had that need. After the first marriage, after the difficult years, I had come to Elda with a real hunger to belong to something, to build something, to not be alone. And that need, which was completely human and completely legitimate, had been identified and used from the beginning. Amalia told me she wasn't telling me this to hurt me. She was telling me because for years she had harbored that unease, and on the night of the dinner, when I put the documents on the table and saw her sister's face, something in her decided that I deserved to know the full story, that it wasn't fair for me to be left only with the part they had shown me. She said she was sorry, that she wished she had said it sooner, that she had been a coward for staying silent for so long. I replied that I understood, that families have their loyalties, and that it's not always easy to cross that line, that what she had told me was important, and that I appreciated it. And I meant it because what Amalia told me didn't destroy me. It didn't plunge me into a new rage or a sadness I thought I had overcome. What it did was complete the picture, give everything I had experienced a broader context that somehow made it more understandable, though no less painful. I hadn't been the victim of an impulse. I had been the victim of a pattern that Elda had built and repeated with different men at different times in her life, each time with more refinement. And that, paradoxically, made me feel something unexpected. It made me feel that there was nothing wrong with me. Because for weeks, in the quietest moments of those lonely nights, I had wondered what it was about me that had allowed it, what had failed in my way of seeing things, what signs I had ignored. And while it was true that I had ignored some, while it was true that I had chosen not to see certain things because seeing them would have broken something I didn't want to break, it was also true that what Elda did, she did well, with years of practice. With a naturalness that made it very difficult to distinguish from something real. I closed the phone that night and sat in silence in my apartment for a while, looking out the window, the tree-lined street outside, the lights of the buildings opposite, the soft noise of the city that continued its rhythm without caring about anything I was processing. And in that silence, something finally settled. Not dramatically, not with a moment of catharsis or tears or any of the things you expect to feel when you close an important chapter of your life, but simply, quietly, like when you finish tidying a room that has been messy for a long time, and you can finally look at the result and say, yes, this is good. This was good. The following months were, in the best possible way, ordinary. I got up, worked, walked in the mornings, read at night, reconnected with contacts, went out with friends, went to places I had postponed, did small things that gave me pleasure without anyone having to approve or question them. I learned to cook 2 or 3 new things, which might sound trivial, but for me had something symbolic. For years, the kitchen in my house had been Elda's territory. I would go in, eat what was there, say thank you, and leave. Now the kitchen was mine, and making something with my own hands, even if it was just pasta or rice with vegetables, was a small, consistent reminder that I was enough. There were difficult nights, I won't say there weren't. There were nights when the silence of the apartment weighed heavily in a way I didn't expect. Nights when I missed, not Elda specifically, but the idea of what I had thought we had, the version of that life I had built in my head that turned out to be different from the one that existed in reality. That's one of the strangest losses, not losing what was, but losing what you thought it was. But those nights passed, and the next morning was always a little firmer than the one before. 6 months after the papers were signed, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I was sitting on a terrace with a coffee on a Saturday morning, with no specific plans for the day, no obligations to fulfill, no bills to check, no messages to fear. And I realized I was calm. It wasn't the tranquility of someone who has resigned. It was the tranquility of someone who has chosen. I thought about Iris, not with anger. I just thought about her, about the 16-year-old girl I had met, quiet and distrustful, whom I had tried to win over with patience and presence. I wondered what would have happened if things had been different. If Elda had taught her something different about relationships. If someone had told her at some point in her upbringing that the people who give to you are not resources, but human beings who deserve something in return. I don't know. That was no longer up to me. I thought about Elda, about the intelligent and confident woman I had met at that work meeting who had made me feel seen after so long feeling invisible. I thought that probably part of what I felt with her was real, that not all of it was an act, that people are complicated and that motivations are rarely completely pure or completely calculated. But I also thought that there are things that complexity doesn't justify, that using someone, even if mixed with a genuine part, is still using someone, and that I deserve more than that. I deserved it then. I deserve it now. I ordered another coffee. An older man at the next table greeted me with a nod. I returned the greeting. A family walked by on the sidewalk, 2 children running ahead and the parents walking slowly behind, talking about something I couldn't hear, but that from the way they looked at each other, must have been something good. Life is going on its course, and me in it, present, light mind. There's something I learned in all of this that I wouldn't know how to say any other way than this. That respect is not negotiated, that you don't earn it by being more generous or more patient or more understanding. That respect is either given or it isn't. And when someone decides not to give it to you, no amount of money or effort or years will change it. The only thing that changes anything is knowing when to get up from the table. And I learned to get up late, maybe with more scars than I would have liked, with $2,000 I'm not getting back, and with years that aren't coming back either. But I got up, and I discovered that's enough, more than enough. If you're reading this and you recognize something of this story in your own life, if there's someone who makes you feel that giving is your only value, that demanding respect is asking too much, that your place in that family or in that relationship depends on how much you produce and not on who you are, I want you to know something. You're not exaggerating, you're not being dramatic, and it's never too late to get up from that table.